When you're in job search mode, they always tell you, do you have a list of target companies? Well, how are you building that list of target companies, right? You're doing research on the company. You're doing research on the culture to say, is this a brand that resonates with me? Is this a culture that resonates with me? Can I see myself as part of this company? Do I want to see myself as part of this company? So you often hear stories about people that maybe didn't get the first job they applied for, but they keep coming back. And sometimes it might even be 2 or 3 years later. But that experience and that emotion that you leave them with decides, do they want to come back or not? Maya Angelou is often credited with the quote of saying, look, I may not remember what you said and I may not remember what you did, but I remember how you made me feel. Right? And that's critical for the candidate experience as well.
Hi, I'm Denise Chaffin, and I am your podcast host for Talking TA. And today I have with me Eric Smuda, Chief Experience Officer or CX leader. And Eric and I met through Open Water. And Eric, I'm super excited to have you on our show. And I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be here and excited to be in front of your audience today. I've always been fascinated by why people do what they do. And that kind of turned into more from an economic perspective. Why do they make the decisions they make? Why do they buy from the brands they buy from? Things like that. And so, as you dig into that, I started kind of in the market research and the voice of the customer world to really understand the what and the why. But then I quickly evolved from what are we doing about this? We're learning all of this information, but how are we driving a better experience? How are we more importantly, how are we driving growth for the company through a better experience and better retention? So that's really been my focus is how do you create better experiences that customers want and want to continue to come back and buy more and closing the leaky bucket so they don't leave.
Well, and I think there are some big parallels really that we can draw from what you're talking about on the customer side. Because I mean, what's the difference between a candidate and a customer? Right? I
Not
mean,
nothing, right? They're both prospects.
they're both prospects that will either stay or go away, I
Right.
mean, yeah.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that. We hear a lot about candidate experience right now, especially, and it's not something that I've really dived into a whole lot because I hear the term, but I don't hear a lot of good detail, and I don't get a lot of, I don't know, just good feedback, if you would, from people on candidate experience, not yet anyway. So I thought that what you were talking about with customer experience, I mean, really kind of gave more credence to this conversation than anything else I've heard so far. So I'm really, yeah, anxious to draw the parallels here. So let's talk about that. Now, you've worked for big companies like Hertz and Avis and Budget. I think, okay, we've all rented cars, right?
Right. Right.
So let's start there. I mean, when they hired you to be a customer experience leader, what were some of the initial projects, if you would, or responsibilities that you had working for big companies like that?
That role, as I said, is really about how do we understand our customers better? And then how do we learn what they need, they want, what their expectations are, and deliver against those and ideally exceed those expectations, right? I mean, the rental car world is very competitive, right? It's one of the few industries where, hey, walk into an airport, every one of your competitors is immediately next door, right? You can watch what the customers do. I mean, you can watch what your competitors are doing. Customers have infinite choice because unlike hotels where you make a reservation and you pay for it or an airline ticket, you haven't paid for your rental car yet. And so, right, switching can happen in real time. And so it's really about understanding those needs, wants, expectations, and delivering against it. So, to your question, what I started with is what do we know about our customers and what do we know about what they want? And We tend to think about rental car companies as really consumer focused, and sure they are. But a preponderance of their revenue actually comes from business travelers, right? The traveling consultants, the traveling business people that are in on Monday and back on Thursday or Tuesday, Friday, whatever their schedules are. And so really understanding that segmentation about what do business travelers want versus what do consumers want, but and there's some commonalities, right? I mean, you think about the airport experience when you rent the car, you're trying to get somewhere. I'm trying to get to vacation. I'm trying to get to grandma's house or my family's house. I'm trying to get to a meeting or a conference, whatever it might be. You want to get off that lot as quickly as you can, right? I want a car. I want to know it's safe and I want to know it's reliable and I want to get off the slot and on my way as fast as I can. Same thing at return. Right? That's a nuisance to most people. "Oh, I gotta get gas, I gotta drop off the car." How do you make that as painless and as quick as possible? Because their anxiety is about how long's the security line gonna be, right? Is my flight on time? They're not thinking about the rental car experience. That's a nuisance between them and the flight. So how do you make that as frictionless and easy and quick as possible?
So let's then transition that then to the candidate experience, especially when candidates right now, moving into 2026, especially, we hear that things are going to pick up. So, what are we going to do then to improve the candidate experience? We're talking too about candidate transition programs and cultural transition programs. I mean, all of these are conversations right now.
No, and look, I'm sure your audience understands, right? I mean, we kind of all those of us that are in HR or customer experience really believe the mantra employee experience leads to better customer experience. Well, employee experience actually starts at candidate experience, right? That's where the candidate gets the first exposure to the brand, the first exposure to culture, and expectations, and so you said it earlier, right? They're prospects at that point, and so do we want them as employees? Do they want us as an employer of choice? There's we tend to think about candidate experience, or at least I think from my perspective, not being in HR, not being a TA professional, we think of it very transactionally oriented, and yet, like I said, it's the first impression of your brand. It can make or break that situation, and as you said, not only are they prospects for the company, they're prospects as customers of the company, right? And so I think for your audience, how do we think about that candidate experience like a brand experience? It is part of the brand experience. And how do we think about it in terms of not only are these prospective employees, but they're also prospective customers. And if that goes sideways, not only are you losing a potential employee, you're also losing a lifetime value as a potential customer. So yes, there I'm a little bit in job search mode myself, and to your point, you see a lot of chatter on LinkedIn and other places about the candidate experience and how it can be improved. So I do think there are parallels there that we can think about in terms of how do we think about that journey and how do we think about the moments that matter. And as you look at the chatter, the public discourse, it's there's some misconceptions, right? People don't understand how candidate tracking systems work or ATS systems work. And oh my God, everybody's using AI to weed me out. And I haven't figured out how to get past the AI and all this game playing that's going on. And so some of it's just a lack of transparency or a lack of understanding from the candidate perspective of how does this process work? What is the human driving? What is AI driving? And then I think it's really just the communication along the journey. Where do I stand? Is this still viable? Am I still a candidate? Some companies are very good at keeping people up to date, and some people, it's the proverbial black hole. I submitted an application and I never hear from the company again.
Now, those companies that are doing a good job in communication with the candidates, tell me about that more, especially since you're kind of in that mode right now yourself.
Yeah, I think it's it's really thinking about how often do you communicate to set expectations, right? So, hey, we're in this stage of the process. We're evaluating resumes. Okay, right? People think, okay, well, I still have a chance, right? They're evaluating my resume. If they get weeded out, just alert them, right? Send them a note. Thank you for your interest in our company. And many companies do this, of course, right? The form letter. But it's very easy to work with your CRM team and say, "Hey, can you send a note to this batch of people?" Right? But it's keeping people informed. And same if you get past that first hurdle, what are the expectations? What does the process look like? What does the timing of the process look like, right? This might be we expect to have a final decision in 6 weeks and you're going to talk to 5 people or, hey, this might take us 3 months and here's how the process looks, but being more transparent, being more communicative, the best TA recruiters are those that keep in touch with the candidate and once a week or every other week just saying, "Hey, here's what's going on." Right?
And when you talk about those candidates too also being customers, oftentimes they are. I mean, especially in the world of tech. Look at Amazon, right? Look at Meta.
We're all customers,
We're all
right?
customers. When you talk about the process, the interview process itself, how many recruiters, and I'm talking to my TA people out here, really identify and explain what the interview process is going to be to the candidates that you're communicating with? Do you even know what the process is? Has a process been determined
Do you
before?
have a process?
Do you
Right?
have a process? Let's make a note of that because without a process and without sharing that process with candidates, how are they going to understand what to look forward to or what to expect during the interview?
Well, you brought up Amazon. It's a perfect example, right? You order on Amazon, they tell you, "Hey, we have your order. Here's when we expect it to ship." "Oh, it shipped." "Oh, here's when you should expect delivery," right? "Here's what the return process looks like." You tend not to have a lot of anxiety or questions about that because they're communicating with you along the way, right? Or, "Hey, we had a problem with a shipment. It's coming Friday instead of Wednesday." But they're communicating with you along the way. They have a process and they're touching base at each stage of the process.
Huh, maybe we should all have a tracking number as candidates. Hey, it's
Why
not
not?
a
We have
bad idea
numbers
if it it's not a
we
bad
have
idea.
numbers for everything else in our lives. Why not?
I know. That wouldn't that be funny if it worked? I know we laugh now, right? And someone's making a little note, "Hey, assign tracking numbers to candidates."
That's right. That's right.
Oh my gosh. One of the things that we had talked about as well before our call today was also the candidate experience programs that we're looking at for 2026. Besides a process, what are some other ideas that you would want to impart or share with talent acquisition leaders, especially again, since you're kind of in this mode yourself?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I think some companies do this well, but it's trying to expose people to what's daily life here. What is our culture life like? Sorry, what are our benefits, and being as transparent as you can. And look, a lot of companies do that well. There's plenty of good examples of companies that have very robust employee and candidate experience sites. You often see even just the, "Hey, thank you for your application" email. Here's links to life at X,"
Oh,
right?
love
Or
that.
or, Here's links to benefits at X." So you're because the candidate's building information as they go along as well, right? I mean, we have to remember this is a two-way street. Not only are we as companies making decisions about the candidate's also making a decision about, is this a company and a brand that I wanna work for, right? So
Well, and when we talk about culture, that's a big word right now. Employee culture, candidate company culture. So let's talk about that. But you just brought up a really good point. If you want to demonstrate a good company culture, sharing information about your company with candidates. And I've had clients who have done that, who have sent links to some really great products, especially on the healthcare side or medical device side. Send links to, hey, this is what we're doing right now to improve the healthcare system for our country or for globally for in some cases. And so it kind of gets the candidates excited then about the opportunities and sometimes they'll come back even if they're not selected for one position, they'll come back and say, "Hey, I found this position online and I'm really interested in that position. Is there some way that you can connect me then with the right recruiter at this company?" And we do when we can. And I think it's great because, again, talk about customer experience. They're looking ahead. This was such a great opportunity that was considered for previously, and I had such a great experience. They provided such wonderful company information and product information. I'm still interested in pursuing this company.
Absolutely, right? I mean, when you're in job search mode, all of the coaches and the various networking organizations, they always tell you, do you have a list of target companies? Well, how are you building that list of target companies, right? You're doing research on the company, you're doing research on the culture to say, is this a brand that resonates with me? Is this a culture that resonates with me? Can I see myself as part of this company? Do I want to see myself as part of this company? So you're 100% right. You often hear stories about people that maybe didn't get the first job they applied for, but they keep coming back. And sometimes it might even be 2 or 3 years later. But that experience and that emotion that you leave them with decides, do they want to come back or not? Right. I mean, Maya Angelou is often credited with the quote of saying, look, I may not remember what you said and I may not remember what you did, but I remember how
Or
you
how you
made me
made me
feel.
feel. Yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
right.
And that's critical for the candidate experience as well.
It so is, definitely. And let's talk about companies where there's gonna be less of a permanent workforce. We kinda discussed that as well. So how do you create a culture and an environment where you have maybe a more transient workforce, especially as we move into the new year?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, I think, for companies. I mean, I tend to think about how do you create culture, and it's how do you set the right expectations? How do you define the behaviors that you want? How do you define the accountability in the organization, right? And so, do employees see senior management demonstrating those behaviors and living up to those behaviors, or do they see a do as I say, not as I do mentality? Nothing will kill morale quicker than seeing, oh, those rules are they have different rules than we have, right? And different cultural expectations. But I ran across this statistic earlier this year, and don't run out and quote these numbers because I don't have the source material in front of me, but it was something like in the year 2000, roughly 2/3 of companies were publicly owned. And in the last 25 years, that's flipped. It's now 60 to 70% are privately owned. Private ownership has increased 5 to 6x in the last 25 years, right? And so that kind of changes, to your point, that changes the dynamic, especially in a lot of these PE-owned companies, right? They have a very short-term focus. They're not thinking about building a great 100-year brand. They're thinking about, how do I maximize my investment in the next 4 to 7 years? How do they get the right talent in place to accelerate growth or fix the problems that are there when they bought the company? But how do I get that done in the next, call it 5 years, as opposed to thinking about building the next great brand or the next great company for the long term? And so, right, what do you see? You see fractional leaders coming in. You see people hiring for very unique skill sets that I need you to come in and fix this or accelerate this. But they're not thinking about it as a 10-year job. They're thinking about it as 18 to 36 months, and then that person's going to move on and go solve a problem somewhere else. So how do you build culture in that situation where some of your executives are fractional, right? They're there for 6 to 18 months, or your workforce gig economy, or more contractors than full-time employees. What does culture even mean to those people? Do they care, right? Or is this just a paycheck and get them to the next gig? And so we've got to have some real deep thinking in those areas. I certainly don't have all the answers.
No, but I mean, how do we get them to care, the gig workers, right? Especially if they know they're only gonna be there for maybe up to 3 years. Of course, I have to say, In my career, some of my longest gigs have been 5 to 7 years when we thought that might be 6 months to 12 months. But again, I think that the company culture had a lot to do with me staying there. If they provided a good culture, a good work experience, even if they knew all along that I was a contractor, and I can draw some lines in the sand on who the good companies were. I mean,
Let's not name names here.
well, here's the
Well,
funny
the
thing.
good ones we can name. Let's not,
Yeah. Well, just the badging itself. When you go into a company, you have to wear a badge. If your badge identifies you as a contractor versus an employee, are you treated differently?
right, right. Are we creating second-class citizens? Exactly.
Right?
Right. No, yeah.
Exactly. So that's interesting right there. I mean, I mean, do you offer any solutions to companies or any ideas on how they can actually create a warmer, more welcoming environment for people who are contractors or gig workers or fractional, all of the above?
Yeah, well, I think you hit on it, right? It's thinking about everybody as equal, right? Our full-time employees are not better than our gig workers and or our contractors, and in fact, many cases, those contractors, fractional people, gig workers are bringing skills that the company didn't have. So you could even make the argument, hey, they're the ones we value more than the full-time employees. And I apologize. I know that sounds a little crass, but they were hired because they have very specific skills to get a job done in a short period of time. And so it's you see so many companies talk about we're a family or we're this, and it's for those folks, how do you create a sense of ownership in that experience? How do you create a sense of belonging? I think you gave a great example with the badges, right? That very clearly separates people, right? So how do you create a culture and remove those things that create separation? Because look, whether you're there for 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, you want to people want to belong to something meaningful. They want to feel like their contribution is valued and valuable. So how do you remove that friction? How do you remove those lines, right? I mean, look, there's certain things, obviously, especially in the compensation system, that a full-time employee is gonna be treated differently than a contractor, but in the daily life, how do you eliminate that, right? We don't have full-time employee-only events, right? Look, right? If you're an employee of the company, right, doesn't matter whether that's a W-2 employee or a 1099 employee or even hired through a temp agency. If you are here virtually or physically as part of our company, you're part of the company, and treat them that way, right? I think that's the biggest challenge is getting over that mindset that there is a difference in those populations.
I was reading an article that said that our ecosystem will replace traditional workforce models in 2026, and it talks about that, and you had brought up, yeah, the VC ownership trends, right? And because that's huge right now, we keep hearing about it and going to conferences, you're running into VC companies, and so, I guess that's what we can expect to see. But there was one, comment where they said that we're not gonna have your traditional employee hiring for 2026. There is gonna be a combination of employees, gig workers, fractional. So, it's gonna be more of an ecosystem, they're referring to it as, for the next year. So this ecosystem, will it will it actually take off? I mean, and are we gonna see this more of a combination of the different types of workers within organizations, not just VC led, but public companies, publicly traded companies as well?
It's interesting, you saw me smiling while you were talking about that. I used to have a boss who would often say, "Things happen slowly until they don't." Right, and so, look, this trend is obviously out there, and this trend is accelerating, whether 26 is the tipping point or not, right? That might be a little bit of clickbait, maybe not, right? Maybe that's when they don't happens, but it's already happening, right? You talked about it, but private equity ownership trends that I referred to earlier, are going to continue to accelerate that. But yeah, HR leaders, talent acquisition leaders have to think about what is the workforce that I'm building and what is the percentage or the combination of full-time employees versus fractional employees versus contractors versus gig workers. And how do you is that one experience from a candidate experience standpoint? I think it makes your life easier if it is, or is it a different experience and being thoughtful about why it's different and how do we make that special for them? I'm gonna extend candidate experience to onboarding, right? What does day 1 look like? And does it matter if it's different for a gig worker, a contractor, or a full-time employee? Like, it shouldn't be, right, 100%, right? And what is the 2 first couple weeks, right, that onboarding look like? How do you assimilate somebody into the company? Shouldn't be.
And especially since some of the people that you bring on as contractors, you might wanna convert them to full-time later on in the year or
Absolutely,
even after just 3 months. So why
right.
would you make them that onboarding experience any different from them as a contractor than you would a full-time employee? Because you don't know what the future's gonna hold for those for all of the above.
100%, right? You don't wanna 3 months later, 6 months later say, "Hey, we're gonna convert you to full time," and suddenly this new door opens and you realize, "Hey, I was mistreated the last 3 or 6 months," right? Or I was treated differently. Let's say it that way, right? You don't want to create that because there's another moment that matters. Right? If it's just a continuity and, okay, now I'm getting a W-2 instead of a 1099, that should really be the only change that happens, right? You're still part of the company. Nothing else changes other than your status in the HR system.
That's right. That's right. Let's talk about AI for a moment. We had this conversation, AI deployment,
Yeah.
because that's obviously the, what would you call it, elephant in the room on every conversation that we have with people these days. AI is gonna take my job. But I think that AI deployment as a CX leader looks different, and I think it's great to, again, share what your experience is around that for our industry.
Well, 2 things that I think are critical for AI deployment. Transparency is one. So what are AI agents doing versus what are humans doing? And do I know that I'm talking to an AI agent versus a human agent? And what's the path to get to a human if I need to, right? There's plenty of things in the talent acquisition, the candidate and employee experience that you can automate, right? But What's have you thought about what's the path when there is friction and the employee can't self-serve or can't get the answer through a virtual agent or chatbot? What's the path to get a quick answer, right? Employee has a question, candidate has a question, how do you resolve that? And that's true in the customer world too, right? Is you call a call center and it's clear you're dealing with a chatbot or a virtual agent, but okay, maybe 80% of the time they can solve the problem for you, but what happens in that 20% of the time? Have you thought through that journey and what's the clean and easy handoff so that the candidate, the employee, the customer doesn't have to step back to square one with the human once they're on there. So that's one, transparency and thinking through that journey. I think the other big one for me is as we think about AI is how do you take a project management discipline to that, right? AI is not set it and forget it. You can't just install it like we put in Workday and it's working fine. Right? AI changes every day. AI changes with every input it gets. And so who's monitoring that? Who's looking at what's it learning? How's it learning? Is it responding correctly? What other information does it need to be more successful than it is today? And so you when you put that in place, you really need to think about who owns this and who's monitoring this, and not on an occasional basis, but on a daily basis. My last role, we put AI agents in the call center ahead of our human agents. And we literally took 2 of our call center supervisors out of their role and said, "Your full-time job now is to train this and look at the outcomes and to look at where it's successful and why it's successful and look at where it's failing or giving the wrong answer and how do we fix that. But that is now their full-time job is basically being the manager of the AI application. And same thing in HR, whether that's employee experience or candidate experience is, are you thinking through it's not just an install and forget. You need to think through who's gonna own this and who's gonna be part of that continuous improvement process, no different than your product management folks are, so
We also talked about AI, generative AI, the learning capability and what it's gonna learn between now and, let's say, a year from now, and how is that gonna change? Like you're saying, having someone monitor it, but along the way, how is AI's deployment going to how will it look different a year from now than the day you installed it?
yeah, if I had the hard answer to that, if I was that good of a fortune teller, I'd be I'd be filthy rich and retired by the end of '26, right? I think I you look at the acceleration of AI and you say I'll give you a baseball analogy. I think we're in the top of the 1st inning, right? We we don't know how this game is gonna play out. I mean, everybody has ideas, everybody has thoughts. McKinsey did a study back in July and just released the results this fall that looked at what are people really doing, and I think the biggest outcome of that study was the hype is way ahead of the reality, right? As they looked function by function, who's actually using AI, right? Who's experimenting, who's piloting, who's actually fully rolled it out and scaled it. In the HR world, at least based on the people they talked to in this study, 85% weren't even using AI yet. Then it was 10 or 12% that are kind of experimenting or doing small pilots. And so now you're left with what, 2 or 3% left that have actually scaled it. And so that's why I say I think the hype is ahead of the reality because everybody thinks, "Oh my god, I'm way behind. Everybody else is doing this." And then, well, look, yes, you need to have your toe in the water. You need to be experimenting or you will fall behind. But has anybody truly solved this and figured it out for as we go into 26? I think very few have.
How can they though? Because like you said, we're at the top of the inning, first inning, and unless you've spent some time working with it and experimenting with it, yeah,
Yeah.
how can you come up with any real, I guess, solutions or answers to some of the AI questions and problems that we might encounter?
Yeah, and I think that's the key point is if you're not doing those experiments already, then you are behind, right? You do need to have, like I said, your toe in the water. You need to have somebody on your team that's really looking and thinking about this and experimenting with it on a daily basis, right? And just like any other technology rollout or new capability rollout in a company, you start small, right? You fail, you learn, you fail, you learn, and then eventually you scale it. So this notion of hey, here we sit in December of 2025, and things are going to be magically different by December 2026. They certainly can be, right? If you're already experimenting and running pilots and learning and improving, yeah, a year from now it could be radically different. But you have to be on that. You have to have your train on those tracks and be doing those experiments and learning. This is not a, "Hey, I'm not doing it all today, and I'm just gonna go find a vendor and buy a system and put it in, and
Yeah.
wow, magically everything's better." That
No.
it's just not
No.
the way AI is gonna work, right?
No.
Um,
It's not
but
like the other tools that were the transactional type tools that we're used to using. I think that's one of the hardest blockages, mental blocks that we have is looking at AI the same way that we looked at purchasing other tools for whatever industry we're in, for automation, or in our case, like applicant tracking systems or sourcing tools or whatever. AI, we can't look at it the same way. One company I do want to give a shout out to, though, and I've never done this before, first time ever, is Microsoft. So I'm a Microsoft customer. And when I run into a problem, in the past, I used to have to call Microsoft and sit on the phone for hours, literally, waiting for the right person. You might get tier one tech support, then tier two, then tier three. I think we've all been through this. And it was like I'd rather cut off an arm than have to call Microsoft. It was a horrible experience. Well, now when you have a problem, and this shows what they've done to kind of and I don't even know that they really had an AI focus in mind when they did this. But when they created their new 365 platform, when you go in and you have a problem, you do have a chatbot. And then you put your problem in and you tell them what it is, and they recognize you as a customer because you're actually going in through your admin settings to create a help desk ticket. So you go into your admin settings, you create your help desk ticket, and then you can let them know. Do you want a phone call? Do you want to do this through email? Do you want to do this through the chatbot? They ask you. You're the customer. How do you want us to respond to you? I always say phone call. Within minutes, I get my first phone call and I can actually go in. So I don't even have to call them. They call me. And so I have to say, Microsoft, you've done a great job. And I think it's a format a lot of people need to kind of follow because it has created this seamless, less harrowing experience that we're all used to. Yeah, because I'm also an Adobe customer, and I noticed now that Adobe has caught on to this idea, and now they're doing the same thing where I could put in a help desk ticket and then Adobe calls me. So I love that format. I think it's awesome. Are we gonna be doing this also with talent acquisition in other industries?
We should, right? I mean, what's the biggest challenge in talent acquisition? And we talked about earlier, right? How do you keep candidates informed? So do they know, hey, what stage in the process am I in? Right? You can use AI to, hey, they can jump in the system and say, hey, where does my application stand? You're at this stage, right? It can, as the company makes decisions and says, hey, we got 100 resumes and we've narrowed it down to, I'm making up numbers here, but we've narrowed it down to 10 that our talent acquisition recruiter is going to call and phone screen. Okay. How do you trigger the automation to tell the other 90, thank you, but no thank you, right? In the most polite way possible to trigger that, hey, I still want to come back in 2 years, as we talked about earlier, right? As you move from 12 to here's the 5 that we're going to interview, right? Same thing. How do you use AI to automate that next steps? And maybe you don't want to, right? You got to think about your candidate experience and say, hey, since I'm going from 10 to 5 or whatever the numbers were that I made up, maybe we do want a human to call those other 5 people and say, hey, sorry, this didn't work out. Here's some feedback, but we're going to move forward with these other 5, right? Same thing. As you move through those stages, what can be automated? How can you use AI? I think there's plenty of application there, right? And then as you get into the employee experience, like there's so many things, both from an onboarding, hey, you've got to fill out all this paperwork, or even the employee experience. I want to, and look, Workday and those kind of tools already do a pretty good job of this. But what can I self help and how can I infuse AI into that so that your more junior HR employees aren't spending their days just firefighting to change somebody had a birth in their family, right? Or somebody got married and we need to change this. Well, a lot of that can be automated. A lot of that AI can figure out because they are repeatable processes. To your point earlier about it creates a ticket. Okay, in the HR sense, maybe it creates a ticket that goes to your HR employee that says, "Hey, Denise has this problem. Here's the history from the AI conversation," and then the human takes over, right? So you create a ticketing system that goes to your HR person, or depending on how you want to handle it, or it tells the employee, here's the person in HR that you need to contact. Now, personally, I think it's better if right, it just creates the ticket for the HR person and he or she reaches out and resolves it for you. But right, companies can decide what they want their process to be.
Well, and the other part of it too, I know in the past, whenever I've worked with companies directly as a contractor or one time as an employee, I recall if we had problems with our computers or our telephones or something technical, we could always contact the IT department and they would give you a help desk ticket. So it's not like we're so far removed from that type of resolution that we have to start from scratch or reinvent the wheel. we can literally take what we've done in the past that's worked and say, "Hey, how can we now then create a process using AI then to kind of start the process for it and then get the human involved as needed, but also make it seamless for the person on the other end to where if they do need a person, that person is going to show up pretty quickly." Just like I was explaining with the Microsoft experience. I don't have to like keep repeating my problem. That's one of the things too. I think we all, as customers, the customer experience, if we have to keep repeating the problem over and over again, when we do run into an issue, that's the most frustrating part. It's like, well, didn't somebody like make some notes about this that you can like refer to? Or do I have to tell you my problem all over again from scratch? Oh my gosh, that's where we are. That's a hair pulling out experience, right?
It is, and I think we've covered some of this, right, in terms of how do you take processes that already exist in the company, right? IT tickets or tapping into your CRM team. Look, marketing's figured out how to automate communications really, really well. So how can you learn from those? It's interesting. The last piece you said there was some data from Gartner that was looking at customer service, and it broke it down generation by generation. So boomers on down, and and so they asked, "Hey, when do you give up on trying to solve a customer service problem?" Right? And I think the choices were, if I can't find the answer myself, if I have to wait on hold too long, if I have to be escalated to a different level in the help desk, or if I've talked to multiple people and they can't resolve the problem. And from Gen X on down, it was 60% or higher that will give up if they can't solve it themselves or if they have to wait on hold too long. And then the follow-up question was, "Okay, if you give up, what happens?" And over half of them, "I stopped doing business with the company and I stopped using their product and service." Th think ab think about the corollary in the, candidate or in the employee space there. Now, look, people aren't just gonna walk away from jobs immediately. Obviously, we need income, but what does that do to the candidate experience? What does that do to the employee experience? Are you starting to set the seeds for people to leave?
Here's the other caveat to that. So, a lot of companies now are talking about employee referral programs where they want their employees to refer other candidates for their jobs. So, if you don't have a good employee experience for the employees you do have, you can't really implement an employee referral program that's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I said earlier, hey, I'm in job search mode myself, and I've seen this in the past when I've been in job search mode, right? Everybody tells you, "Hey, find the employee that can refer you. It's a better way in." And to your point, candidate, I mean, companies want that too, because if an employee knows a good employee, that, that's further down the path. And yet, how many companies, and I've seen it more than my fingers can count, an employee puts a referral in and that person never gets contacted, right? And look, maybe their resume is not right for the job. I get that, right? There's no obligation to hire the person just because there was a referral. But I think your audience needs to think about, do we at least owe that person a candidate screening conversation? Because okay, A, maybe they're not right for that role, but maybe to your point earlier, there is a role that's better for them in the organization. But more importantly, what impact does it have on the referring employee when they say, "Hey, I want to refer Denise for this," and Denise never gets a call? What does that employee feel like, and how likely are they to make referrals again in the future? It's a big missed opportunity. And so, yeah, you can say, "Oh, it's wasting my recruiter's time. They have to have a 15-minute conversation with somebody that I know is not right for the job." Okay, maybe they're not, but A, they might be for the next role, and B, what impact does that have on the employee that's making the referral?
Yep. And is that employee going to offer up other referrals later on if they know that the referral that they submitted already hasn't even been contacted?
Yeah, I had a couple employers ago, and I won't name the company for obvious reasons. They did the smart thing when I joined and said, "Hey, within the first 30 days, who else do you know that might be a good fit here?" And so I gave a couple of names. and they had such a poor candidate experience that when they came back 6 months later and said, "Hey, we're hiring for this particular position, and we're pretty sure you have contacts here," I said, I'm not willing to put I'm not willing to put my friends and my professional colleagues through that experience again."
Because that also plays back on your own reputation with those
100%.
people. Yeah,
100%. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
So, yeah, it's it doesn't, like, have this, like, start and stop to the customer experience or candidate or employee experience. It keeps going. It's like AI. It just keeps going. It's going to keep learning on itself, right? Even our own experiences. We don't need AI to continue to learn about these experiences.
right. Well, and even think about boomerang employees, right? That
Oh my
experience,
gosh.
right? I mean, the consulting companies are great at that, right? McKinsey's and Bain's and those folks. When you leave, you're considered an alum, right? And you have access to certain resources. So even thinking to your point about how does it move from candidate to employee, but how does it circle back on itself with boomerang employees or even alumni employees still referring people into the company?
It's interesting you say that. We've had 3 clients over the last several years who've asked us to go back and contact employees who left and see if they would entertain coming back, returning to the company. A lot of them did, but the first question they asked is so and so still managing that department? They left because of leadership. The majority left because of leadership.
Of course, you've been in HR. I've never spent a minute in in that function, but we've all seen the data that says, right, people join companies, they leave leaders or they leave managers. So that doesn't surprise me that that's the first question asked.
That's right. And it's amazing. Or oftentimes they know that the leaders have left, and there was one guy in particular who was hired for an engineering role with one of our clients, and he said, "I left because I was working for a manager that I no longer wanted to work for. But I know that that person has left, and I've been keeping my eye on the company ever since." And so
Interesting.
we brought him back. Yep. But
Interesting.
again, the experience that they had the first time around as an employee is going to really influence their decision whether or not they'll talk to you about returning to the company. But 90% of the time, it's the leadership.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I think in your example that says something about the employee experience and the culture that they would even consider coming back or that they were actively looking to come back once that leader was out of the way.
Isn't that amazing? Yep. So it does. It's a yeah. It's a circle. It's a very circular, very or cyclical. Cyclical. That's the word
No,
I'm looking.
it works the same way in the customer experience world, right? You mentioned when I got to Hertz, one of the things we quickly learned was our fleet, quote unquote, our product in the rental car world was not up to snuff relative to our competitors. And so we went out and spent $100 million to upgrade our fleet. But then we used our CRM team to push notes out to people saying, "Hey, we know you used to be a loyal customer. Here's what we've done. Please come back, give us another try." It worked. Right? I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars of growth. So it does work.
Yeah, it does. And again, I'm going to use my Microsoft experience. I was never a fan. In fact, I went from using PCs to Mac computers because I could not stand the experience that I had every time I'd have to contact Microsoft. Well, now we're using Microsoft for
Now you
Mac
just told a whole audience of how great Microsoft is.
because they changed their experience, their customer experience.
Yeah. And the same thing works with the candidate and the employee.
It really does. Great conversation. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
What can HR, what can talent acquisition learn from things that are already going on in the company, right? You referred to the IT ticketing or the customer experience department. Too often I hear the platitude employee experience leads to customer experience, and yet I don't see those two departments working together very closely. So go have that conversation. Go figure out how do we work together better because any company that has frontline employees, that relationship is true. So how do we make that work better? How do we take advantage of it because the company benefits from it, which means the employees benefit from it.
Precisely. Eric, honestly, I think this is gonna be a great, uh, recording to broadcast because it's really kinda opening up a conversation, like I said, that I haven't had with other people about the candidate experience, and I think drawing those lines between customer experience and candidate experience, I think will help a lot of people in our industry go, "Oh, yeah," and have some aha moments around this. So this is super helpful, and I am sure that somebody watching this is gonna wanna hire you. So think
I
about
hope
the
so.
candidate experience because, you might get hired for a candidate experience management role, you never know.
Well, look, I hope so on both accounts that A, it opened up people's minds, and B, yes, if if that were to work out, let me know what your employee referral fee is, and I'm more than happy to pay it.
That is so awesome. No, it's so great to meet you. It's so great to know you and also to be a co-member of Open Water. I'm sure we're gonna be, meeting up on, other webinars and other platforms that they offer to us because it is a great
It's a great organization,
it
yeah,
really
and
is.
I don't know Seth and An and Chris as well, but I've known Stu Berman for 13, 14 years. If he's touching it, it will be successful, so, yeah, I love the organization. I met some great people in there already and look forward to
Ditto.
meet more.
Ditto. Yeah, in fact, they've got an Open Water for women, and they meet once a month, and I try to join as often as I can, but unfortunately, sometimes timing isn't. There's yeah, the schedules aren't right on, but still, they offer some great events, and not only that, at this point in time, the membership is free, so I am putting in a plug for them. It's openwater.group for anybody who's interested, and this is how Eric and I have met, so and here we are doing a podcast together, so I think it's obviously a great example of what this organization can offer. And then, Eric, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn, of course. Eric Smuda, Smuda. So I think that's the best way. My contact information is there. So if we're connected, you'll see phone and email and all of those things.
Well, thank you so much for your input on this. It's great. I think you've opened some new doors for us to all consider.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and hope it's something that your audience is interested in and really takes action on.
I'm sure they will be. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise.
All right.